Hey there everybody, how's it going? Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming out today. So I'm at the side of one of my favorite rivers, creek actually, Catherine Creek here in coming out of the Eagle Cap Wilderness. I heard today that there's supposed to be 2 mating pairs of grizzly bears up in the Eagle Cap, so in Oregon. The person who told me said they haven't seen any pictures, so they're not sure it's true or not. I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, it's pretty wild out there, so, well, anyway. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about ISO. Every once in a while, somebody will make a comment on one of my videos, usually when I'm talking about metering, where they'll say, well, film ISO isn't the same as digital ISO, or Fuji rates ISO differently than Sony rates ISO, or whatever, you know, and that always kind of really irritates me. Because it kind of shows a lack of understanding of what ISO is to begin with. ISO, it stands for International Organization of Standards. And it's an independent third-party organization that like 160 countries have agreed to abide by their standards, the standards of this International Organization of Standards, ISO. International Standards Organization, either way, it's the same thing. And so what this international organization does is it comes up and it standardizes criteria that if people want to make things that like everybody can agree upon, they'll use these standards in order to make their products, so that somebody in China, let's say, can use a camera made by somebody in Germany and also use a camera by somebody made in Japan and also use film by somebody made in the United States. And if it all is at ISO 100, right, it's all the same. Or is it? Well, it should be, okay? But as with anything, the devil is in the details, and once you open up this can of worms and you start trying to realize what they're doing, it's a very simple concept that really turns into something very complicated very quickly. But I'll do my best to give you the Reader's Digest version of it. So the International Standards Organization, they'll come up with standards for everything. And there's a lot of standards in whatever camera you have that the camera companies have tried to implement, like the standards for what color blue is, the standard, well, all the colors for that matter, what color oranges and purple and green, like there's international standards for, you know, organization standards for that. Well, there's also International Standards Organization standards for the ISO. Let's separate the organization from what's come to be known as film speed or sensor sensitivity. Same thing, sort of, okay? And this all started with film, right? And way back when, without going through too much of a history, it started out with DIN, which was 1935, and it was to standardize black and white films. And then it turned into the ASA, American Standards Association. And then it became an international thing, so ISO. For a long time you'd get film that said ASA and a DIN number. And then after that, when they dropped the DIN, a lot of film said ASA, and then it had the ISO number, so it would be 100 ISO ASA, right? Or ASA ISO, okay, EIEIO, okay. And the standards get updated, okay? There's a committee of scientists that when they feel the need to update the standards, they do. So if you're gonna make film, or if you're gonna make a camera with a sensor in it, the standard you wanna be using right now, as of 2023, is the, as far as I can tell, the 2019 standard for sensitivity, light sensitivity, which is ISO standard 12232, okay? the devil's in the details, okay? So I'm going to kind of go out on a limb here. I haven't researched it that much, but I'm pretty sure that when they're trying to figure out the base ISO of a film or the base ISO of a sensor, or to put that another way, just the ISO of a film and the base ISO of a sensor, I have a pretty good feeling that I think what they're doing is they're correlating maximum sensitivity for least noise. And so wherever that converges, where you get the most signal to noise ratio, is probably where the base ISO of your sensor is going to be, and it's probably where your film speed's going to be, okay? Because if you've been in photography for any length of time, you know you can push film. You can rate, like say you have a 100 speed film, you can push it to 800, develop it differently. It's going to be noisy, but you can do it and you'll get an image, okay? Well, it's the same thing with your sensor, right? So your sensor is going to be, give you the most signal for the least noise at its base ISO. With my Fuji 40 megapixel sensor cameras, that's 125. With the other Fuji 26 megapixel sensors, that's 160. And like Nikon's Z7 II 45 megapixel sensor is 64. A lot of cameras for a lot of years used 100 as the base ISO, so whatever. So that's the standard that the camera companies should be, in quotation marks, air quotes, adhering to. How close they get and what they're doing is up to them. I mean, there's no law that says, you know, I mean, the interpretation is up to the companies, okay? But in order to all be on the same playing field, they're starting out with ISO standard 12232. I think that's the number from 2019. Where things start to get a little pear-shaped is that if you want to make your meter in your camera, if you want to make it within 1/10 of a stop, that costs a certain amount of money. If you want to engineer it to be within 1/50th of a stop, that costs another certain amount of money. If you want it to be within 1/100th of a stop of what the actual light is, that's going to cost a certain amount of money. If you want to get it to within 1/3 of a stop, that's going to be a lot cheaper, right? Okay. So this is my Sekonic 858, and I use this for my film work. It's a $600 meter, and all it does is meter light. Now it does do flash and etc., different kinds of metering, incident and spot. But the point is Sekonic has manufactured, we hope, and in use it's kind of proves to be true, has manufactured this meter to be very accurate, okay? More so than your average camera, all right? And so when you use this meter, you can really dial things into where they ought to be. I noticed that when I got a Pentax digital spot meter, and all of a sudden, because up until that point, this was years ago, 20, 30 years ago, up until that point, I'd been using in-camera metering. And when I got the Pentax digital spot meter, it's like all of a sudden, my images on my film, like things started really being exposed properly. Like that nth degree was there. Same thing with this meter. And the only camera meter that I can point out that I think is really exceedingly accurate, that I've always been amazed at the results, and it's not the, I mean, God, it's a probably 40-year-old meter, is the TTL meter in the Pentax 6.7s, the old Pentax 6.7s. I think Pentax manufactured that to a much higher standard, because when I use that meter in the Pentax 6.7s, my exposures are always like I'm using a Pentax digital spot meter. They're always like that nth degree of perfectly exposed. To further complicate issues, nowadays most of us are using matrix metering in our new cameras, and what that is the camera meters thousands of points, the pixels in the scene, and then the computer quickly compares what the metering from all those points of light on the sensor is to like thousands or tens of thousands or millions of potential images, supposedly, and then the computer decides on what the correct exposure is. Quite honestly, like, I've been thinking recently to go back to center weighted, which just kind of just takes most of its meter reading from the middle of the scene, because most of the time with matrix metering, I'm dialing in some kind of exposure compensation either based upon the histogram. So as with anything, there's more to this than meets the eye, but I will tell you this: I can use this meter at ISO, set to ISO 125, and it should give me the same exposure as my XT5 does, and it will, okay? And you know, because they're all made to the International Standards Organization standard of 12232, I think that's the number, and from 2019. Or then they don't change these standards too much. The reason that they've been changing the standards is because the camera sensors and meters have been getting more accurate, and the sensors have been getting more fine-tuned, so the standards had to increase a little bit in order to be more accurate, and as I understand it. So, but I can use this meter with my digital camera, I can use it with my film camera, I can use it with anything that uses an ISO standard for what they're choosing their ISO to be. And for all practical purposes, there's no difference, okay? ISO 125 on this meter is absolutely comparable to ISO 125 in my Fuji camera. It will be absolutely comparable to ISO 125 in a Nikon camera, in a Sony camera, in a Canon camera, or Ilford FP4 Plus ISO 125 speed film. And that really is the bottom line. So I hope this was helpful. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and we'll see you out here. It was a hot one today, so dress appropriately. We'll see you. Have a great one. Bye.